Today, I am chatting with Alex Rikleen from Rotowire as we continue our journey around the fantasy basketball world, finding out how he got to the top of the tree. Let's go balls deep.
I could bet all of the riches that I ever had.
Welcome to another episode of the Balls Deep Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Fantasy Basketball International. FBIbasketball.com is the website. Head over there, check out all of our Dynasty content. Matt Lawson's got a ton coming out at the moment. I've got some player ranks up at the moment, as does my guest, Alex Rikleen. We are the only two nutbags stupid enough to have rankings out at the moment. Alex, how are you, good sir?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to summer and the easy season. And Celtics are, I don't know when this will publish, but at the time of this recording, Celtics are doing pretty good and optimistic, and things are good.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, I mean, we don't have specific dates for these yet. I would say it would be maybe in end of May, maybe early June. So hopefully the Celtics
are still going to be doing great then.
Still playing, yeah. I mean, people would have been listening to these. It's just about half an hour sitting down with analysts during the sort of the downtime or the off season, talking about how they got to where they are in fantasy basketball and just in life, what they do outside of fantasy basketball. For a lot of us, this isn't our full-time job, unfortunately, as much as we would like it to be. We do need to earn a living elsewhere. Of all the analysts, other than Josh Lloyd, obviously, because he lives here in Australia with me, Alex is actually someone that I've met face-to-face. I think you're the first one that I've interviewed. So we managed to catch up at Summer League in 2019, I think.
Yeah,
the Zion
2019.
The Earthquake
yep.
Summer League. So that was good. It's always good. And hopefully we'll catch up again when I'm over there later in the year. So look, from a fantasy analyst perspective. So I said you work for Rotowire, but you also contribute for a few other sites as well.
Yep.
So do you want to just, I guess, give us a little bit of information about who you do contribute for and how you... Well, we'll start with fantasy. So how, I guess, your journey and how it started and how you got to where you are now.
Sure. So right now, I work for Rotowire. That's sort of most of where I do my fantasy stuff. I also do some stuff for DraftKings, their DK Live app, which is a really good in-game stats app. I find it loads quickly and easier to maneuver than ESPN or several of the other apps. So gonna plug our app there. But so I do some work for them. Those are the two places I work for directly. But as you're talking about the fantasy industry, one of the sort of weird nuances of the fantasy industry is the way that I work for Rotowire, but a lot of my articles get published on CBS or Yahoo. And without totally boring your listeners with the specific logistics of that, it is through a partnership between those sites, and those sort of business side partnerships are actually kind of common. So many of you may know me from the weekly CBS waiver wire columns through the season that I've been doing for a couple of years. And that's sort of most of what I've been doing since my kids were born. I used to do a lot more and slowed down a lot when
kids get in the way, don't they?
Once those kids started coming.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's and yeah, that is true. Yeah, Rotowire does have a few standing partnerships with other platforms, and so yeah, you do see your articles pop up, and the player blurbs obviously pop up
Yeah.
in a few different places as well. So for you, like, so I know that fantasy basketball isn't your full time. It's not what you do every day, all day. You have a life outside of fantasy basketball and outside of family. So what is it that you do during the day?
Well, so right now, so I'll sort of do the whole story because it'll work easiest that way.
Good idea.
Um, so I started um, in 2013. I was finishing up in grad school, and I was looking. I'm a certified teacher to teach math and history at the high school level. And as I was looking for teaching jobs, and remember, this is 2012, 2013. This is sort of um, back when, at least in the United States, teaching jobs were a little harder to come by than they are these days. That process for a couple of years that after the Great Recession was really competitive. And so as I was sort of plugging away looking for teaching jobs, I was procrastinating by writing a couple fantasy basketball articles. And I started just with some sort of random startup blog that is long since deceased. And I was sort of sharing those articles around, and similar to the story that Josh told on your podcast that was released already. Kyle McEwen, he saw my articles and sort of reached out and was like, "Hey, if you can write this, you can work for us." And so sort of quickly got started on the very low part-time rung at Rotowire. So I worked in education, teaching for a few years, doing part-time Rotowire stuff, trying to just slowly build, from it started as I was the Magic, and then and then I switched from Magic to 76ers beat writer, where I was just like checking the local news for Orlando and then for Philadelphia and writing blurbs the rare time something happened that in the news that wasn't already caught and written up by the other Adam at Rotowire, who's on the ball. And um, and so I was doing that, and then I got a monthly sort of Friday night shift that paid very poorly, but I was like, I'm getting paid. And then I started doing, this was sort of as DFS was building up, and so Rotowire started releasing more DFS articles, and that was my first article, and I was like, I have an article with my name on it. Like every step of the way, there are all these like mini steps that were super exciting. And I became a regular contributor with several weekly things by 2016, when I wanted to leave the school I was at and decided to sort of take the leap. I figured I built up enough of a reputation and work amount at Rotowire that I could jump and try to do this full time. And, financially, it was a hit. I could not have done it without my incredibly supportive wife. But I gave it a try, and for 4 years, fantasy was nothing was salaried. Everything was putting together a hodgepodge of freelance and contract work for different companies. But for 4 years, I was full-time fantasy writing. And then in 2020, in early 2020, just before COVID hit, I had my first son, and I really pulled back. And since then, I have been, I still do some writing, of course. I still have my weekly waivers column and a couple other things, but I pulled way back, and I'm doing as much full-time dadding as I can, with the only caveat being a sort of weird, neat thing. For the last couple of years, This is my 4th year doing it. I have been teaching a college course on the fantasy sports business. And so every spring I have a bit more work in addition to parent and fantasy basketball, where I'm teaching this college course. And that's a lot of fun. Get to sort of dip my toes back in teaching and also work at fantasy. So always sort of hard to define my career and what do you do. But, a lot of parenting and some teaching and some fantasy stuff.
Yeah, well, I think I was thinking that actually when we did in 2019 when we were at that summer league, that you just said that was before you had kids, so a lot changes very quickly once you have kids. Look, for me, I mean, the fact that a course even exists based around fantasy sport is mind blowing. Like that's I wouldn't think there's anything like that here in Australia. So in terms of that course, like what's the purpose, I suppose, of a course like that? Is it to get people into the space of writing and that sort of thing?
So, as far as I know, there's only one other course in the country. I haven't done an exhaustive search of the world, but at least in the United States, as far as I know, there's only one other course like it. I came up with the idea and pitched it to a college. And my premise is it's a part of the sports management department. Okay. And my core premise is if you want to work in sports as a business, you need to be familiar with the fantasy landscape because that is an important growing part of the sports business. And those are some of potentially your most engaged customers and the customers most likely to spend. There are studies out that people who play fantasy sports have a way higher average income than the average American, and they're more likely to be college educated. And there's all these demographic signals that say that we're a good target audience for business. And so there I get people who are already super into fantasy and want to join the industry, and we've got a unit for that. I've got a unit of how to be better at fantasy sports, even if I don't know what sport you're playing. But there's also sort of a lot of business side stuff around what are companies spending money on, how are companies making money, stuff along those lines. What's the regulatory situation of impacting fantasy sports? So that core idea of just if you want to work in sports, you need to be conversant and knowledgeable on the fantasy side, or else you're not going to be as good as your job as you should be.
Yeah, and look, I think, for me, that rings really true, because if I know, obviously the people that we work with and the analysts, and even a lot of the people that follow us and comment and ask questions and that sort of thing, that you can see they know what they're talking about. You watch some of these NBA games, and I don't know if I'm on an island here, but some of those commentators, you have to wonder, how much, other than sitting and watching the game that they're commentating, how much research do they actually do ahead of time?
My theory is that Shaq and Charles Barkley haven't watched a game that they weren't paid for in 15 years. And I'm calling them out by name, but there are so many others who are in a very similar situation. There are a lot of people, and they're just it's a couple of years outdated at this point, but when they did a who he play for of Rashawn Holmes, I was just this guy is starting. What do you, how do you not know this guy? Every single fantasy player in the country, even people who are not very good at fantasy, knew who Rashawn Holmes was. And national broadcasters didn't. And I think it says something about us as an audience. We are an engaged group of potential consumers.
That's right. And I think the fact that obviously if you're playing fantasy, you need to know about all players and all teams and the league as a whole. Whereas you listen to some of the, even just the local callers, so that who just call their team, they know about their team,
Mhm.
but when a visiting team comes in and they're commentating on that, they'll say things that you just go,
That's not
really?
true. Yeah.
This is you don't know who this guy is. Their name pronunciations are just wacky and way off on some players. It's pretty frustrating to think that
Yeah.
these guys are getting paid all this money to to do a
It,
job and they don't do it
yeah.
well.
A related concept is like, it drives me nuts that no fantasy writer or analyst has a vote on the like
Mm.
I'm not saying it should be me. It probably shouldn't. There are bigger fantasy names
Yeah,
than
yeah,
me.
yeah,
But someone in the fantasy space should have a vote on all NBA and All Star, etc. Like there are people who, you listen to them talk and it's just super duper clear that they haven't watched a regular season Wizards game or thought about a regular season Wizards game in years.
yeah,
Whereas the fantasy community, like we are the analysts and we are the consumers who pay attention to the league as a whole.
yeah.
And so those are the kinds of stuff that I sort of try to advocate for. I haven't found a
Mm.
receptive audience in the league office yet, but I hope to someday. My
Oh,
my
yeah.
my
Look,
dream is to someday convince the league to give someone a vote. I'm not asking for it to be me. I just want someone in our space to have a vote.
yeah, yeah. I mean, based on obviously followers, it's probably going to be someone like Josh,
I would assume it would be Josh,
who
frankly.
who's sort of, I guess, yeah, in terms of exposure, that sort of thing, he's right at the top at the moment. So, yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. I think that'd be amazing. So, outside of fantasy, I mean, you've, much like a lot of the analysts I've spoken to, you have got two young kids, so they tend to take up a lot of your time when they're that age. They're very dependent, and um, but when you're not parenting and when you do get some downtime, what sort of things do you enjoy doing, whether it's with your wife or by yourself? I mean, for a lot of us, fantasy basketball is sort of the hobby that we like spending time doing, and it just happens to be a job as well. But um, yeah, any other specific sports that you enjoy following? Anything else?
um, Boston College hasn't had a good basketball or football team in a few years, but when they do, I get very into that. Any of you who follow me on Twitter know that I get unreasonably excited when Reggie Jackson or Kai Bowman for a couple of weeks the year the Warriors were bad. I get real pumped for them. I'm a big New England Patriots fan. I follow the NFL very closely. I haven't done much in fantasy football since my kids were born, but before my kids were born, I was doing at least as much football for DraftKings as I was doing some basketball stuff. In terms of just like hobbies, my wife points out that I have a penchant for enjoying digging holes in the ground. We bought a house a couple of years ago, and I've just like done landscape project after landscape project that requires digging holes. I don't. I just planted 2 new trees in the front yard today, and so spent the weekend digging a bunch of holes.
I think surely you have to update your Twitter profile with something around digging holes. I think that would be
Yeah.
perfect.
I really like watching movies. I don't do as much of it as I wish I did, but I enjoy doing just sort of nonfiction writing.
Yeah.
Don't do nearly as much of that as I wish I would, but enjoy cooking. Yeah, normal
Yeah. Okay.
dad stuff.
Yeah. Normal dad stuff. In terms of movies, any specific genre? Like for me, it's. I mean, I like a range of movies, but I love horror movies. So I go and watch them anytime a horror movie comes out at the cinema. I'm always there watching it. And not a lot of people like it. Like, it's a bit niche, the horror genre, I suppose. It has gone a bit more mainstream in the last 5-10 years.
Yeah.
Any specific movies come to mind for you that you can go back and watch again and
Yeah.
again?
Well, so I have three very. I have. I don't watch horror at all.
Okay.
One of the first weekends away with my then girlfriend, now wife, um, just like being playful, I like hid behind a wall and like jumped out to scare her.
Yep.
And literally, instead of like screaming or like something, she just shouted, "I don't like scary movies." Like the full sentence. And I don't either. I do have sort of, I tend to watch a lot of the, like, I'll get really invested in a sequence. I've seen all the MCU movies multiple times,
Yep.
except Eternals. That was so bad.
Yeah, it was great.
I've seen all the Star Wars and stuff like that. I've been going through the Fast and Furious movies lately. Those are a delight. My three favorite movies. One, I knew this question was coming, so I chose my wardrobe intentionally. Keen-eyed viewers might notice that this is the Lebowski sweater
Yes.
that he's wearing for much of the movie. A great Hanukkah gift back from a couple of years ago. So Lebowski, I very unironically love the movie Speed Racer, the live action, like 2008 one.
Yep.
I think Emil Hirsch is the lead.
Yes.
A lot of people pan that movie. I think it is a delight.
Interesting choice.
It is so colorful and just like it knows what it is, and it leans so hard into it.
Yeah.
The inspector detector suspected foul play, just like perfect dialogue. And Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Okay.
Those are sort of the three that I will watch. Those three any day, anytime. They're like my happy place.
And with your kids are still very young. So what your eldest is 3-ish.
Yeah.
Transitioning into the Disney and the kids movie space yet?
I have tried to get this kid to watch like some of the, like, I tried to get him to watch Moana because like I enjoyed Moana. That was a fun movie. He just has no interest in anything that isn't Sesame Street related.
Okay.
I guess Winnie the Pooh. He likes Winnie the Pooh too. But if it's not Sesame, he loves watching Sesame Street. But I cannot get him to watch anything else.
Okay, we'll give it time.
Even when I try. Looking forward to getting some diversity in there.
Yeah, it is good when they reach that age, because I mean, as you said, like Moana, a lot of the Disney movies now, they make them for adults as well.
Yeah.
And you're then happy to sit and, I mean, Frozen, maybe not Frozen, but with a lot of them, you're happy to sit and watch them again.
It was a solid movie.
It was fine. I actually preferred the sequel with Frozen. I liked the second one.
A big ongoing debate between one of my friend groups from college is Frozen or Frozen 2. The treatises via group chat have been written.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I don't know why I like the second one, but a lot of kids' movies. Yeah. I mean, I love a lot of the old Disney movies, Aladdin, Lion King, all those. Robin Hood is one of my favorite ones. So it is good when the kids do get to that age a little bit, and you can start sitting down watching those. And then my son now, who's about to turn 13, we've just finished watching Stranger Things and all the Star Wars movies, Guardians of the Galaxy movies, all the Godzilla movies. So he's moving into that space now where I can watch all those cool
movies. Are so silly. Man,
they are
those are so silly.
They are. But he just likes big things, big monsters.
Yeah. Has he seen Pacific Rim?
He has, yes. He likes Pacific Rim.
That's another good one.
Yeah, so we watched Rampage the other day with the Dwayne Johnson.
What about
monkey?
The one with Hugh Jackman? Real Steel or something.
Oh, he hasn't watched that actually, but
That's a
that might
good
be one. I
large
don't.
things fighting movie.
It is, yeah, yeah. There's only a couple of check boxes when we have to pick a movie to watch. Then there's not many. Like it's pretty easy.
Well,
So
while we're diving in on stupid movies, which great fantasy basketball content, strongly recommend for like people to not watch the Transformers movies. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but read the detailed plot synopsis on Wikipedia of the Transformers movies.
okay,
That is high comedy.
All right.
Because trying to take that movie seriously enough to write a fact-based, detailed plot synopsis is some great unintentional comedy.
Right.
I wouldn't
Okay.
wish those movies upon
No,
anyone.
no.
But
And there's a new one coming out, so they keep pumping them out.
just what we all wanted.
All right. Well, I'll be going to Wikipedia once we're done here to do a bit of light reading on my day off. So I guess the final question, and this is a fantasy one, although we're not here to specifically talk about fantasy. Victor Wembanyama is obviously a player that's on the radar, has been on the radar for almost 12 months now.
At least
we need to start thinking about him in terms of next season and where he's going to be drafted. So a two-part question. The first part being, where would you be comfortable at the moment? I mean, this could change obviously with where he's drafted, that sort of thing. But at the moment, as of right now, where would you be comfortable drafting him next season? And the second part is, where do you think his ADP will fall once we're in the midst of draft season?
So I think his ADP will fall probably in the early third, if I had to guess. I think it'll start more late third, and by the time we get close to the season, it'll be early third, maybe even second round. And as you know, I am famously never rookie.
Yes, you are.
This is like literally one of my biggest talking points in the fantasy space is don't draft a rookie but before the 100th pick in your fantasy drafts. And I've written multiple articles about the logic behind why that cutoff, etc. He's my exception. This is the first time since 2013 that I've been writing about rookies that I am going to sit here and say I am totally fine with using a third round pick on him. Now, I want to be a little careful about that. In friends leagues where I think that I'm better than my opponents and I think I'm going to do well anyways. But an important part of fantasy, this is
that's right. No, you're
talking about this with my students last week. An important part of fantasy is knowing your opponent level. When you are in a friends and family league and you think that you're one of the better people in the league, you should take fewer risks, because you taking less risks is going to generate one of the best teams. When I'm in a league with other analysts where the quality of competition is high, and like if I don't make the playoffs in a friends and family league, I'm embarrassed. I'm the fantasy guy who can't make the playoffs. But if I come in last in a league amongst analysts, I don't care. All of you guys are good. All of us are doing this as our job. Like, I don't feel shame in that. And so not only is there less downside to like bombing, but I need to take more upside risks in order to have a chance to win, just because the quality of competition is so high. And it's in those competitive leagues where I'm talking about Wemby in the third round. In a friends and family league, I would rather late fourth, maybe even fifth if I can. But unfortunately, I don't think he's going to be there for that.
No.
So functionally, in a league where I expect to be one of the best teams just by nature of my job, my answer would be kind of stay away. I think the ADP is just going to be too high. But in a competitive setting, I'm going to probably be drafting a little bit of Wembanyama this season, and it'll be the first time I've drafted a rookie in the top 100 ever. Certainly in a decade.
Yeah. Look, it's going to be very interesting. I mean, I've asked this question to everyone, and there's mixed responses. Quite a few people can see him going as early as top 15. So sort of on the turn in some spaces. Most people are very similar in terms of where they want to take him, and it's around that third round. Like, I think that's pretty consensus across all analysts, except for, have a feeling Dr. A was happy to reach as high as he needs to get him, and which he does. He just gets his guys. He doesn't care about public perception or ADP or anything. So it's, I think a little bit like you. Like, I would love to have him on at least one team this season. And
it's going to be fun.
It is, and I'm not sure. Where he's going to go in terms of a landing spot. So where he lands in the draft, do you have a preferred landing spot for him, or you don't really see a difference?
For fantasy, I'm not sure there's a huge difference. I guess the Rockets probably isn't ideal just because of the infrastructure around the lacking infrastructure and the fact that team's strongest at power forward. But I really but he's, if you get Wemby, you're building around Wemby, so it doesn't really matter so much. I really have been thinking it much more from the perspective of just like, for the sake of NBA and being a fan, what do I want? And that's really, I've spent much more time thinking about that than for fantasy, because for fantasy, I'm not sure it's going to make a huge difference. And I just want him to go somewhere where I have a ton of confidence in the training staff. So, the Spurs, I think we tend to trust their training staff. Phoenix, at least historically, tended to have a pretty good training staff. New Orleans historically is a nightmare for injuries. So please, protect Wemby at all costs, keep him away. The Spurs are my rooting destination, just because it won't annoy me if the Spurs are good and if they get this incredible building block. And I think that they have the ability to sort of protect him in a way that I don't trust every team to. And the reason I have Wemby in the third round and not in the second round is because games played, he's not playing more than 65 games next year.
No.
65 is the upper limit. He's probably playing less than that. They are going to be generous with load management, and they have to be, and they should be. Give this guy some time to develop an NBA body. So the games played issue and the health risk is the reason I have him in the third and not even higher. To the idea of someone drafting him at 15 in a fantasy draft, feels like a reach. You're running out of upside if you take him that high. If he has the best season possible, you're still barely profiting. But after the top 10, it's a very muddled group after that. And so if you want to play around, you feel like you've got one of those 11 to 20 guys that you think is a rock solid hit, and because that area is so muddled, you think you're going to get them. I get it if you want to take Wemby that early. Like I don't think it's a good idea, but there are plenty of worse ideas in the world.
Yeah. I think, as you said, it's interesting. Like you've obviously done some rankings, and I've done mine, and I think next season, when I was going through looking at tiers and all that sort of stuff, I think after about pick 8-ish, pick 9, there's actually a run of almost a round's worth of players that could all easily be first round per
Yeah.
game guys.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, much like this season, but I think actually picking, if you don't get pick 1 or 2, maybe, you really want to be picking towards the back end of the first
Yeah.
round. Ideally, I think that's where I'd like to land
Yeah.
next season.
I agree. I think you want pick 1, and then my next group of picks is sort of either like 9, 10, or 2. I do think there's some value in 2, but
Yeah, I think
in
so.
getting SGA,
Yeah.
but getting I for me, when I was looking at it, and again, I'm gonna totally ignore the rankings. When we're making ranks in August, I'm gonna throw out what we did and I'm gonna make my ranks, and then I'll go back and be like, hey, have I changed too much?
Yeah.
But I'm gonna start from scratch when I do this again in August. But looking at what I did last time, I really thought that you could make a pretty coherent argument for 9 different players at pick 2. And like I had an order for them. But for me, it was 9 players who, if you wanted to take them second, like I'm not going to fault you, which means that I would like to pick towards the bottom of that range to get one of them, and I don't care which.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. It was a little bit like that this year, but I think even more pronounced. And if we look at, I mean, I haven't looked at all the data yet, but I think from memory, the average games played now is sitting at around 68, 70.
Yeah.
So you don't have to, I mean, Kawhi's a poster child, I guess, for this, but you don't need to look at these guys like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and sort of go, well, if they're not going to play 80 games or 75 games, do I really want to draft them this high? Because they only really need to be playing 65 to be almost on par with the rest of the league. That's just the way it's headed. I think unless the league reduces the number of games to 72,
I would love it, but it's
70,
not happening
but it's not
anytime
going to
soon.
happen. No. So it's all about the money and revenue and all that sort of thing. So, okay. So interesting. Look, I'm going to let you go and go and check on your family and make sure they're all still functioning. Before you go, again, this is a bit of a downtime and during the off season. But what sort of things have you got on the agenda leading into sort of August when we start looking at our ranks seriously?
Gloriously nothing. I'm
Very
not
good.
writing again until next article I write is going to be why I'm breaking never rookie for Wembanyama. And the way I look at it, I have 3 months to slowly write that thing.
Very good.
And I'm not writing anything until I write that, and I am delighted about that. Find me on Twitter. I'll tweet stuff, but I'm not writing.
Find at Rikleen on Twitter. Are you for me? Before I let you go, so for me this season, I got into Dynasty a little bit with the what's it called, the Pro 30 or the FBI 30, Dynasty 30, I think. Is Dynasty because obviously now is the time when a lot of the content is out and coming out. Matt Lawson is producing a lot.
He's doing great stuff.
Is that sort of something that you've always been into, or are you getting into that space a little bit more? Like for me, this time of year is the downtime, but I'm actually enjoying all of the Dynasty content, not only to assist with my journey down the Dynasty path, but also just in terms of redraft leagues for next season.
I've played Dynasty for maybe 4 or 5 years. I think that my first Dynasty league that I was in, Luka was a rookie. So I guess that would make this the 5th season. Sorry, I got to plug in my computer. So I've played that long, but I've always really loved the game theory of keepers. And so, and some of my favorite leagues were keeper leagues. So, I really love thinking about dynasty and keeper stuff, but I've only actually been in a dynasty league for about 5 years now.
Yeah, and I would just say, like, for a lot of people, this 3-month period now is when you can step away from fantasy and have a mental break and not have to worry about the NBA, that sort of thing. I would recommend just at least just listening into a podcast, whether it's Matt or whether it's like Rhett Bauer does some really good stuff as well. Noah Rubin's got his new show out. So just keeping, I guess, a foot in the door, because a lot of what they talk about is relevant to not only dynasty but redraft. So I think that's just a piece of advice.
Yeah, I mean, you learn a lot. You get better at fantasy by learning about basketball. You know, Zach Lowe is a great fantasy basketball podcast, and I'm pretty sure that man has never played a fantasy game in his life. But you know, learning about the league in that way is, I think, being attuned to what's happening and how players are developing, et cetera, is really always good. Even if you play redraft, it definitely is helpful to be aware of that stuff. Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Look, thanks for coming on. That was fun.
Of course.
Always
Lovely
fun to chat to people. That will do it for today's show. Remember, check out all of our content. As I said, fbibasketball.com is the website. All of Matt's stuff over there. Follow us on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe. We're slowly making our way to 1,000 subscribers. I think we've unofficially made that a goal for us before next season. If we can get to 1,000, that would be really good. So all of those subscribes are appreciated. Until next time, catch you later.
You just listened to another episode from the Fantasy Basketball International Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us. And for more information about joining our community, please check out our website at fbibasketball.com.